Okay, so let's go back here. User stories. These are the user stories that we use in the product backlog to show what. Okay, let's start. Let's settle down. Let's settle down. Are we done with talking? You please leave the room to talk. Okay, thank you. I think you have the right to talk, but it's just that not in my class. Okay. And so these are some user stories that you can consider and study, but user stories are very brief. So it doesn't say enough of how to implement that feature for the customer, for the users. So what can we do? We have a term called acceptance criteria. Okay, so acceptance criteria are some additional information for each user story. For example, think of this user story. As a user of the library catalog, I want advanced search options on the front page so that I can quickly and easily refine my search. So this is a user story, but you can, if we want the programmers know how to do it, well, just based on these two lines of description, the programmers can do many different things, and they all may appear to fit this description. So we think it's not enough. So we also, at the right time, we also want to write down the acceptance criteria for the developers so that he or she can finish this user story. For example, when you say you can search, but what kind of key do you want? Okay, so here it says I can limit the search by format or type. For example, this is a library, so maybe I want to search movies. Maybe I want to search CD. Maybe I want to search books. Maybe I want to search periodicals. That means magazines or newspaper. So I want to be able to search by the type. And I can also use date range. If I'm searching for book, maybe I want only the 5-year. Let's say I'm trying to search for a travel guide. I'm going to visit a foreign country, and I don't want to use a 10-year-old tour book because the information there may not be very good anymore, may not be valid. So maybe I want to limit my search to a tour book that's within 5 years. Okay, so it's published no longer than 5 years. Or maybe if you are computer programmers, maybe you look for some book and you have a rough idea that who is the publisher. So you want to be able to provide additional information for you to do the search. Author's name, title, and you also want to be specific. For example, some word may appear in title, may appear in publisher's name, or publisher's name and author's name. You want to be very specific. So maybe you have written down a number of requirements, additional acceptance criteria. For example, you want to take the book out right now. You don't care about a book that someone has already borrowed, so you would filter by available. You only search for a book that is available. So this is one way of describing more about the user stories. Okay. So we've seen user stories and we've seen additional information for acceptance criteria. But at the beginning of the project, you don't have to write down the acceptance criteria for all the user stories because that will take too much time. So you would only, at the beginning of the project, you would only write down the acceptance criteria for the top priority user stories, the most valuable to users. And also, let me ask you a question. When do we conclude a Scrum project? That is a trick question. I guess immediately some of you may think, oh, by the time I finish all the PBIs, all the user stories on the product backlog, then our project's finished, right? Wrong, okay? That's a trick question. In fact, the customer would be getting new features like every few months or every month or two, okay? And then the features, the user stories on the product backlog would be one by one being like implemented. But remember, what order do we take those user stories from the product backlog? We take the most valuable first. So maybe at some point the customer decide that I already got the most important, most valuable features that I want. So the ones that has not been implemented are not that important anymore. So maybe at some point you still have a few user stories on the product backlog. It's not complete yet, but then the customer may say, oh, that's good enough. I have a good enough product. I'm happy with this product that you have got. So that means we may not finish all the user stories, okay? So let's wrap up the product backlog. Scrum tries to do the least possible amount of documentation. Okay, so yes, Scrum does not create lots of as many documents as Waterfall, but it still create a very brief product backlog at the beginning. And the product backlog only holds a wish list. A wish list means something you want to have, but then maybe you may not end up buying it. For example, I have an Amazon account. I have a wish list of books. Sometimes when I see some books, I think it's good, so I add it to my wish list. But because I don't have time to read it right now, so I decide to put it in the wish list. Someday, when I have time to read, then I'll look back which book on the wish list is more useful to me now. Then maybe I'll buy it. But then some books would just be there for a long time and I never buy it. So that's the same with the wish list of user stories in the product backlog. Sometimes it just stay there and it may not be, the customer may not actually want you to do it in the end. Okay? A Scrum project usually have several releases. A release is the time that you give the software for the users to use. Okay? And a release generally has several sprints. So initially on the product backlog, we do not have much detail about the user stories because it's only role, what to do, and benefits. So when I finish one sprint and then it's time to choose new PBIs from the product backlog, I'll choose the most valuable ones. And then after that, I would break up each PBI into multiple developers' tasks. So PBIs are usually user stories from user's perspective. Later on, once it's chosen, then we break it up potentially with the developers from the developer's perspective. Okay, and product backlog is one document, and another document is sprint backlog. We have one sprint backlog for every sprint. We already had the break, so let's skip this break and go on to this sprint backlog example. Sprint backlog is different from the product backlog, and for each user story, this is the user story. You can recognize the format as some type of user. I do this for this benefit. Okay, and how do we do that? We break it up into a number of developers' tasks, team members' tasks. For example, it may say code certain thing, design certain thing, meet someone. This may be a customer representative, and designing the UI, maybe do some testing, and we want to automate the testing, and so on. And then the right-hand side of this, after you break down a user stories into multiple tasks, we have these days. Initially, this is the estimated person day for this particular task. For example, this maybe require 8 person day to complete this task. Okay, and day 2, it may be updated to 4, and then day 3 updated to 8. Usually, most tasks would goes like this. This number means the remaining time to finish the task. So day 1, the remaining time is 16 person day. Day 2 is 12 person day. So what it may mean is, well, maybe 4 persons are working on it. So 16 person day, after 1 day, it becomes 12 person day. Okay? And occasionally, you may see the number go up. Okay, so what happened when the number go up? Maybe, oh, looks like this is the, maybe after meeting with Mary, maybe Mary is a customer representative to get us the requirements. And we find out that, well, maybe the requirements are very complex. So it takes more time than we thought initially. So after 1 day, we increase the amount of remaining work to do. So you can see that by summing up each task remaining time are usually not shown in this example. Usually there's a row in the bottom that I would say the total remaining time required to complete the 2 user stories. So the time should be decreasing it as a whole. As you can see, it's also actually decreasing. Okay, the general trend. Okay, and how many person days left on day 4? 4 plus 11 plus 8 plus 6 plus 4 is 33. Okay, so 33 person days of work left. Is that? Oh, maybe. Okay, sorry. Maybe this is person hours. Okay, this may be person hours. Okay, suppose we have 33 person hours left. imagine if our project has 4 members and we're using 1 week as a sprint size. Okay, remember a sprint can be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or 1 month. And we're using 1 week, and it's a general rule for agile people that when they plan their project, they do not plan to work extra hours. They only plan 40-hour work week. Okay, why? Well, because people, if you have problem, if you start out to already require expecting that you need to work overtime to finish the project on time, and what if you make a mistake in your estimation, then you're never going to make it. So if you plan your project to finish on time without the need to work overtime, then if something goes wrong, you can still work a few extra hours to catch up, right? So that's some idea. So if you have 4 persons working on this, then each person work on 8 hours. So 4 times 8 is 32. Then this 33 hours worth of work, we still have a good chance to finish it after day 5. So how do we create the sprint backlog? One task is to estimate the time. It can be person hours, it can be person day. It depends how small you want to break things up. Okay. And one benefit of using Scrum is you know anytime the progress of the thing. For example, each task clearly has stated the remaining work done. So each day, the responsible person doing this task would give an update of the remaining work to be done. So each person is supposed to report this on their assigned task. So this way, we know the actual progress at any time. So that is how. So we see Scrum as an agile project management method. Okay, it's actually a project management method. So the word transparency means you can see something through. So the project, the progress, you can see through it. You can, and nothing is hidden. Okay. Another tool that we use in Scrum is called burn down chart. Burn down chart will show a diagram that the horizontal, the x-axis, are days, and then the vertical axis are the remaining effort in hours or in days. So you can see that here I said we can have a row here summing up all the remaining effort, and that remaining effort can be used to plot this graph. Initially we would draw it with this red line showing the ideal effort hours. So it should always be a straight line unless someone is taking holiday. Okay, someone's taking holiday, then the shape of the line would change a little bit. But if everyone comes to work, they work full-time on the project, then there would be a straight line. Okay. So for example, consider this. Okay, so the red line is the ideal effort hours, but there's an effort remaining that's actual. The blue line is the actual. Sometimes the actual may be above the ideal. That means there are more remaining work than the planned case. And sometimes the blue may go below it. For example, right here. That means we have less remaining work. So that means we're progressing faster than we expect. So this you should know that the actual remaining higher means is bad, lower means is good. And at the end, if the blue line meet right here, that means we did not finish everything. Okay, if the blue lines meet right here, the bottom, the x-axis, before we get to the last one, that means we are ahead of schedule. Now, if you have not read the notes, can you guess how many full-time people are working on this team? How many full-time people are working on this team? Let's take a look. 5 days. There are 5 work days in a week. 5 work days in the second week. So there are a total of 10 work days. 10 work days. Okay, so one person in 10 work days, how many hours will he work? It's 8 times 10 work days, so it's 80. So one person will contribute 80 hours in 2 weeks. Remember, we don't assume overtime. So pretend this is at 400. So that means we have 5 people. So each contributing 80 hours to this project. So we think we have that 5 people. And these, we can have some calculation done automatically. For example, you can define your own spreadsheet to do the summing for you, or someone has done this. Okay, this is a sample sprint backlog, so you can. I haven't really tried theirs, but spreadsheet is a very common way of doing the sprint backlog. Okay, we have discussed a little bit. This remaining work actual, the blue actual line, has been above the ideal line. That means we have more remaining work than the ideal case. So that's not good. Okay. So we are behind. We're behind. And this one, initially we are behind. We are above, and we never get below the ideal line, but eventually we meet there. We arrive there. So this means we had a slow start, but eventually we catch up. So that's good. For this line, initially we are ahead of schedule, but somehow, for whatever reason, people slow down and now we are behind. So we have not finished yet. So either we catch up or we would have incomplete work. Okay, so let's take a break and take a 5 minutes break.